The day I graduated from Columbia with honors should have been purely joyful. Instead, there she was, Diane, my stepmother, standing awkwardly at the edge of the crowd in a pastel blue dress that couldn't hide the damage she'd done to our family. For years free from her manipulation hadn't been enough time to wash away the bitterness that rose in my throat at the sight of her. What is she doing here? My brother Lucas hissed, instinctively moving closer to me, as if after all these years, he still needed to physically shield me from her. My mother, Elena, tensed beside us, her Mexican features hardening into the stoic mask she wore whenever Diane was mentioned. She squeezed my hand so tightly I felt her engagement ring cutting into my palm. Madison, Diane called out, taking a hesitant step toward us. I just wanted to see you on your big day. You look beautiful. Dad stood frozen between us, the eternal man in the middle, his loyalties perpetually divided. Even now, after everything we'd been through, he couldn't bring himself to tell her to leave. Some bonds, no matter how toxic, are nearly impossible to break. Growing up in our Brooklyn brownstone, life had once been simple. Mom, Dad, me, and Lucas. Mom's colorful Mexican heritage blended with Dad's traditional American upbringing, creating a home filled with both tamales at Christmas and 4th of July barbecues. But when I was 8, everything changed. Dad's law firm hired Diane as their new office administrator. And within months, my parents' marriage crumbled. The divorce wasn't what destroyed us, though. It was what came after. Diane didn't just want Dad. She wanted to erase any trace of our family's previous life, especially Mom's influence. I was too young to understand the complexities of adult relationships, but I wasn't too young to notice how Diane would accidentally throw away birthday cards from my maternal grandparents or schedule urgent family outings whenever Mom was supposed to pick us up for her weekend. But let me back up and tell you about the scissors incident. I was 10 years old, spending the weekend at Dad and Diane's new house in Greenwich, Connecticut, a stark change from our cozy Brooklyn home. I'd fallen asleep reading, my long dark hair splayed across the pillow. I woke to the cold touch of metal against my neck and Diane's whisper. Such beautiful hair. So much like your mother's. Wouldn't it be easier to care for if it was shorter? I froze, terrified to move. Her scissors glinted in the dim light coming from the hallway. Dad appeared in the doorway, his silhouette unmistakable. Diane, what are you doing? She laughed, a sound that never reached her eyes. Madison and I were just discussing a new hairstyle. Weren't we, sweetheart? I looked to my father, waiting for him to say something, to protect me. Instead, he sighed. Come to bed, Diane. It's late. And they left. Just like that. He never mentioned it again. The next morning at breakfast, Diane acted as if nothing had happened, serving perfectly round pancakes with a smile that looked painted on. I didn't touch my food. Dad buried himself in the newspaper, the invisible wall between us growing higher by the second. When Mom picked us up later that day, I burst into tears the moment we were in the car. Mom listened, her knuckles white against the steering wheel as I recounted what happened. She tried calling Dad, but Diane answered, claiming I was making up stories again, to cause trouble. She's always been imaginative, Diane told Mom, her voice dripping with false concern. Maybe she needs to see someone about these fantasies. That was Diane's specialty, making others question reality. Gaslighting wasn't just a tactic for her, it was an art form. By the time I was 13, Diane had given birth to my half-sister, Cassidy. I wanted to love Cassidy, and for a while I did. She was innocent in all this, a wide-eyed little girl with Dad's blue eyes and Diane's blonde curls. But as Cassidy grew older, Diane began weaponizing her, too. Madison doesn't really love you, I overheard Diane telling 4-year-old Cassidy after I'd missed one of her ballet recitals because of a math competition. She thinks she's too smart to spend time with you. The worst part? Dad was standing right there, witnessing this poison being dripped into Cassidy's ear, and yet again, he said nothing. Lucas had it differently. Being the only boy, Dad seemed to connect with him more, taking him to baseball games and fishing trips, father-son activities that somehow always excluded me. But Lucas saw through Diane's facade. At 16, he was already more perceptive than Dad had ever been. She's jealous of you, Lucas told me one night as we sat on the fire escape outside Mom's apartment, sharing a pint of ice cream. You're smart, you look like Mom, and you remind Dad of his life before her. She can't compete with that. I scoffed. What's there to be jealous of? I'm just a kid. Lucas shook his head. You're not seeing it. Every time you get an award at school. Every time Dad praises you for something, I watch her face. She hates it. He was right, of course. The dynamic became clearer as I entered high school. My academic achievements were met with Diane's backhanded compliments. It must be nice to have so much free time to study while the rest of us handle real-world responsibilities. When I was accepted into honors programs, she'd remind Dad about the cost of college and how Cassidy would need savings too. But everything escalated when I was 17. My maternal grandmother passed away, leaving Mom a substantial inheritance, including family jewelry that had been in their Mexican family for generations. The centerpiece was an emerald necklace that my grandfather had given my grandmother when they first immigrated to America. Mom had always told me it would be mine someday. 2 weeks after the funeral, Dad and Diane invited us all to dinner, supposedly as a peace offering during a difficult time. Mom was reluctant but agreed for Lucas and me. I still remember how uncomfortable the restaurant felt, everyone forcing smiles while Diane dominated the conversation, speaking about her charity work with exaggerated importance. After dinner, Mom drove us home to her apartment, only to find it completely ransacked. The emerald necklace and other valuable heirlooms were gone, along with Mom's passport and citizenship papers. The police investigation went nowhere, no forced entry, nothing else of obvious value taken. Just the irreplaceable family treasures and documents that connected Mom to her heritage and legal status. It took Mom 3 months to get her documentation resolved, during which time she couldn't travel for her job as an international art consultant. The financial strain was enormous. As for the jewelry, it never turned up. We all suspected Diane, but there was no proof. Until 6 months later, when Lucas and I were at Dad's house for the weekend, and I walked in on Cassidy. Then just 5, playing dress-up. Around her neck hung a familiar emerald pendant, clumsily attached to a child's plastic bead necklace. "Cassidy, where did you get that?" I asked, my heart racing. "Mommy gave it to me. She said it's very special and I can only wear it when I'm playing in my room." I took a photo with my phone before asking Cassidy if I could borrow it to play dress-up too. Naively, she handed it over. I immediately showed Lucas, who confirmed it was definitely Grandma's emerald. We decided to confront Dad alone first, showing him the photo and explaining where we found it. I expected shock, anger, maybe even remorse. Instead, his face went completely blank. "That's not the same necklace," he said flatly. "Diane bought something similar for Cassidy's birthday. Dad, it has the same chip on the left side of the emerald. It's Grandma's." His voice turned cold. "Enough, Madison. I won't have you accusing Diane based on a child's jewelry. Your mother lost the necklace during the move. She's always been careless with valuable things." That night, Diane cornered me in the kitchen. Her voice was low, controlled, but her eyes burned with fury. "I know what you're doing," she whispered, standing so close I could smell her cloying perfume. "But you should know something. Your father will always choose me. Always. You're just a reminder of his mistakes." I shook my head, fighting back tears. "Stealing from my mother doesn't make you family. It makes you a criminal." Diane's smile turned predatory. "Prove it." The next day, Lucas and I returned to Mom's apartment and showed her the photo. Unlike Dad, Mom recognized the emerald instantly. She went to the police, but without physical evidence, just a photo of a similar-looking gem on a child's play necklace. They couldn't do much. When Dad found out we'd gone to the police, he was livid. Not at Diane, at us. At Mom. "You're trying to destroy my marriage," he shouted during a rare phone call to Mom that I overheard on speakerphone. "Poisoning my children against Diane won't bring back our failed marriage." Mom, always dignified, simply replied, "Robert, someday you'll see the truth. I just pray it's not too late for your relationship with your children." It was the beginning of the deepest rift between us and Dad. Lucas and I still visited as required by the custody agreement, but the visits were tense, superficial. Diane played the victim masterfully, telling neighbors and family friends that Mom was mentally unstable and trying to turn us against them because she couldn't accept the divorce. Some believed her. Many didn't. But Dad, the one person who should have seen through her manipulation, remained firmly under her influence. The summer before college was when Diane executed her most calculated attack. I had been accepted to Columbia University on a partial scholarship, but still needed financial aid. Dad, as a successful attorney, needed to provide his financial information for my application. The deadline was approaching, and despite my weekly reminders, Dad hadn't submitted the necessary paperwork. When I called his office directly, his secretary seemed confused. "But he submitted those forms weeks ago," she said. "I processed them myself." Diane dropped them off. Ice formed in my stomach. I thanked her and immediately called the financial aid office. No paperwork had been received. The deadline was the next day. In desperation, I went to Dad's house unannounced. He wasn't home. But Diane was. When I demanded to know what happened to my financial aid forms, her mask slipped. "College isn't for everyone," she said with a shrug. "Maybe this is a sign you should consider community college instead. Your father and I need to focus on Cassidy's future. She's gifted, you know." Cassidy was 7 at the time. "Where are my forms?" I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. Diane smiled that empty smile. "I have no idea what you're talking about." I tore through Dad's home office while Diane watched from the doorway, making comments about my unstable behavior. In the shredder bin, I found scraps of my financial aid documents, torn to bits. I gathered as many pieces as I could, took photos of them in the bin, and left without another word. That night, Mom and I stayed up until 4 a.m., taping fragments together and filling out new forms. Mom drained her savings to cover what would have been Dad's contribution, ensuring I wouldn't lose my spot at Columbia. When Dad called the next day, his voice was cold with anger, not at Diane, but at me. Diane told me what happened. Breaking into my office? Accusing her of destroying your paperwork? Madison, this has to stop. Dad, I found the shredded forms in your own office. How can you not see what's happening? His sigh was heavy with disappointment, in me, not in the woman who was systematically destroying his relationship with his children. I think you need help. Madison, Diane suggested a therapist. I hung up. In that moment, something broke between us, something I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. Lucas, who had been accepted to NYU, faced similar obstacles, but managed to secure independent financial status with Mom's help. For the next 4 years, Dad became an increasingly distant figure in our lives. He attended some holidays, sent birthday checks, but the man who had once taught me to ride a bike and helped with science fair projects was replaced by a stranger who couldn't, or wouldn't, see the truth. Diane's campaign to isolate Dad continued. She convinced him to move even further away, to a suburb in Connecticut, making regular visits nearly impossible with our college schedules. She controlled his social media, accidentally deleted our messages, and scheduled family events that conflicted with our planned visits. Most heartbreaking was watching Cassidy grow up being fed lies about us. By the time she was 11, she barely spoke to me during the rare times we saw each other. Once, I overheard her tell a friend that her half-sister hates her because she's jealous. Diane's words, coming from a child's mouth. And now, here she was at my graduation, smiling as if 4 years of estrangement could be erased with her presence on my special day. Dad looked between us, hope and uncertainty battling on his face. Mom and Lucas stood protective on either side of me. Madison, Diane said again, stepping closer. Can we talk? Please? The crowd around us continued celebrating, oblivious to our family drama unfolding. I looked at this woman who had caused so much pain, who had manipulated my father and poisoned my sister against us, who had stolen not just material possessions, but years of what should have been normal family memories. Why are you really here? I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. Diane's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. I need to tell you something. About everything that's happened. I don't think this is the time or place, Mom intervened. Her voice calm but firm. The protective arm she placed around my shoulders spoke volumes. Lucas nodded in agreement. Madison just graduated. This is her day. But something in Diane's expression made me pause. Behind the carefully applied makeup, her eyes held a desperation I'd never seen before. Dad stood slightly behind her, looking more haggard than I remembered. The confident attorney who once commanded courtrooms now seemed diminished, aging beyond his years. 5 minutes, I said finally. That's all you get. Mom squeezed my shoulder. You don't know her anything, Carino. I know, I assured her. But I need to do this. We moved away from the main celebration to a quieter area beneath a large oak tree. The irony wasn't lost on me, having this conversation under the tree of knowledge on the day I received my degree in psychology. My 4 years studying human behavior had given me new insights into the toxic dynamics that had shaped our family. Where's Cassidy? I asked, noticing my half-sister's absence. With my sister. Diane replied, fidgeting with her purse strap. I didn't want to complicate things. Dad cleared his throat. Madison, there have been some developments at home that... Let me speak, Robert. Diane interrupted, a flash of her old controlling behavior showing through. She caught herself and softened her tone. Please. Dad fell silent, and Diane took a deep breath. I've been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. The words hung in the air between us. I stared at her, searching for signs of manipulation, another calculated play for sympathy. But the slight yellowing of her complexion, the weight loss I'd initially attributed to vanity, the uncharacteristic tremor in her hands, it all suddenly made terrible sense. I'm sorry to hear that. I said carefully, unsure how to feel. I don't want your pity, Diane said quickly. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because... She faltered, seeming genuinely at a loss for words, something I'd never witnessed before. Because facing mortality has a way of forcing you to see the truth about yourself. She looked down at her hands, manicured nails digging into her palms. I've been seeing a therapist for 6 months. Not because of the cancer, but before that. Things at home had become unbearable. Dad shifted uncomfortably beside her, but remained silent. Cassidy started having problems at school. Diane continued. Lying, manipulating other children, stealing small items from classmates. When the school counselor called us in, she asked if Cassidy had experienced trauma or if these behaviors were modeled at home. A humorless laugh escaped her lips. It was like looking into a mirror, but one that showed the ugliest parts of myself reflected in my daughter. I couldn't bear it. I remained silent, processing her words. still wary of another elaborate deception. I started therapy to help Cassidy, Diane said, but ended up confronting things about myself I've spent a lifetime denying. My therapist helped me understand that I have. She hesitated. Narcissistic personality traits with borderline features. The clinical terms hung in the air, terms I'd become intimately familiar with during my psychology studies. Terms that explained so much of what our family had endured. And then the cancer diagnosis came 3 months ago, she continued. Suddenly, all the energy I'd spent maintaining control, keeping up appearances, manipulating situations, it seemed so meaningless. So destructive. Dad finally spoke, his voice rough with emotion. We should have told you kids sooner about the diagnosis. But Diane wanted to wait until after your graduation. I looked between them, still suspicious. Why are you really here? What do you want from me? Diane met my eyes directly, perhaps the first truly honest gaze she'd ever given me. To make amends, if possible. Or at least to acknowledge the harm I've done. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. Starting with this. When she opened it, I gasped. Inside lay my grandmother's emerald necklace. The green stone catching the May sunlight. I took it, Diane admitted. I orchestrated the break-in at your mother's apartment. I hired someone to steal the jewelry and documents while we were all at dinner. Dad's face crumpled in shock. What are you talking about? You said Elena must have misplaced. I lied, Robert. Diane cut him off sharply. I've been lying for years. About everything. She turned back to me. The necklace was only part of it. I shredded your financial aid forms. I deleted messages from you and Lucas. I scheduled events specifically when you were supposed to visit. I've been systematically destroying your relationship with your father. The confession, delivered in her steady, articulate voice, was surreal. Years of gaslighting had conditioned me to doubt my perceptions, yet here she was, confirming every suspicion we'd had. Why? I managed to ask. What did we ever do to you? Diane's composed exterior finally broke, tears spilling down her cheeks. Because I couldn't bear that he loved you first. That he had this whole life, this family, these memories that didn't include me. Every time he looked at you, I saw him remembering Elena, remembering the life they built. I couldn't stand it. Dad staggered backward as if physically struck. Diane, our children, how could you? Because I'm broken, Robert. Diane's voice rose, drawing glances from passing graduates and their families. She lowered her volume, but not her intensity. I've always been broken. My father left when I was 6. My mother reminded me daily that I was the reason he left. That if I'd been better, prettier, smarter, more lovable, he might have stayed. She wiped angrily at her tears. I learned early that love is conditional, that people leave unless you control every aspect of their lives. I saw how Robert looked at Madison with such pride, such unconditional love. It triggered everything in me. If he could love her that completely, what would stop him from leaving me like my father left? The psychological explanation didn't excuse her actions, but it contextualized them in a way that touched the part of me that had spent 4 years studying the wounded psyches of humans. So you tried to destroy his relationship with us, I concluded. Yes, she admitted. And I've been working with my therapist to understand why I did these terrible things. The cancer has accelerated the process. I don't have time to slowly work through my issues anymore. She held out the velvet box with the necklace. This belongs to your mother and eventually to you. I kept it all these years as a trophy, I suppose. Proof that I could take what Elena valued most. I accepted the box, but didn't open it again. The weight of it in my hand felt like closure to a chapter that had been left painfully open. There's more, Diane continued. I've written a full confession about everything, the break-in, the sabotage of your financial aid, all of it. I've given it to your father's attorney to hold. Dad looked shell-shocked. When did you do that? Last week, Diane replied. Along with amendments to our will and financial arrangements that ensure Madison and Lucas receive what they're entitled to from you, regardless of what happens with us. The calculated thoroughness was pure Diane, even in confession. And Cassidy? I asked, thinking of my half-sister who had been as much a pawn in Diane's games as the rest of us. Diane's expression crumpled. She's struggling to understand. I've started being honest with her, with professional help. Explaining that the things I told her about you and Lucas and your mother weren't true. She shook her head sadly. The damage I've done to her might be the hardest to repair. She trusted me completely. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of sympathy for Diane. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition of the tragic cycle playing out across generations. I don't expect forgiveness, Diane said, echoing my thoughts. I just needed you to know the truth before. She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavily in the air. Dad stepped forward, tears streaming openly down his face. Madison, I failed you and Lucas. I should have seen what was happening. I should have protected you both. His words unlocked something tight in my chest. Yes, you should have, I agreed, my voice trembling. We were children, Dad. We needed you to believe us. I know, he whispered, looking older than his 52 years. I was weak. I chose the easier path, believing what I wanted to believe rather than seeing what was right in front of me. I don't know if you can ever forgive me for that. The graduation celebrations continued around us, joyful families taking photos and embracing. Our little group beneath the oak tree stood in stark contrast, raw with painful truths too long unspoken. I should find Mom and Lucas, I said finally. They're waiting for me. Of course. Diane nodded. Just one more thing. I've been working with my therapist on making direct amends. Would you allow me to speak with your mother? To return what I've taken and acknowledge what I've done. The request was so unexpected that I almost laughed. That's not my permission to give. But I doubt she'll want to see you. I understand. Diane said quietly. If you could give her this then. She handed me a sealed envelope. It explains everything. Includes the information about where to find her citizenship documents. I had copies made before destroying the originals, and a cashier's check for the value of the other jewelry that I sold. Dad looked at her in shock. You sold Elena's family jewelry. Diane didn't flinch from his gaze. Yes, to punish her for still having a place in your heart. The brutal honesty was almost refreshing after years of manipulation and lies. I need to go, I said, feeling suddenly drained. For years of higher education. Culminating in this moment, not of triumph, but of painful reconciliation. Madison, Dad stepped closer, hesitant. Would it be possible for us to talk more? Soon? I studied the face that had once been the center of my childhood world. The man who had taught me to ride a bike and cheered at my science fairs. But who had also stood by while his new wife systematically destroyed our relationship. I don't know, Dad, I answered honestly. I need time to process all this. He nodded. Disappointment and understanding warring on his face. I'll wait, as long as it takes. As I turned to leave, Diane called after me one last time. Madison, regardless of what you decide about me or your father, please consider reconnecting with Cassidy. She needs good influences in her life. She needs a sister. The mention of Cassidy, innocent in all this, shaped by Diane's manipulation just as surely as I had been harmed by it, gave me pause. I'll think about it, I promised. I walked back to where Mom and Lucas waited, clutching the velvet box containing our grandmother's emerald and the envelope for Mom. My mind was a storm of emotions, anger, vindication, grief. And something unexpected, relief. The reality I had perceived, but could never prove had finally been acknowledged. What did she want? Lucas asked immediately, protective as always. I handed Mom the emerald box and the envelope. The truth, apparently. Mom opened the box and gasped softly, her fingers trembling as she touched the emerald that had been lost to us for years. How? Diane confessed. To everything, I explained. She has cancer, stage 3. Mom's expression softened slightly. Dios mío. Don't feel sorry for her yet, I cautioned. Read the letter first. As we walked across the campus toward the restaurant where we had reservations to celebrate my graduation, I filled them in on Diane's confession. Lucas alternated between disbelief and vindication. I knew it, he kept saying. I freaking knew it. And Dad just, what? Suddenly believes it now. She's dying, Luke, I reminded him. Changes the stakes. Doesn't change what she did, he retorted. Or that Dad let her do it. Mom, who had been quietly reading Diane's letter as we walked, finally spoke. People are complicated. Mijos, your father, he has always wanted to believe the best about people. It made him a blind husband, but not a malicious one. That's generous of you, I said. Surprised by her grace, after everything she'd endured. Mom folded the letter carefully, returning it to its envelope. When you've lived as long as I have, you learn that holding on to anger only poisons yourself. She touched the emerald now hanging around her neck. I never thought I'd see this again. My mother wore this when she became an American citizen. It was her most prized possession. We reached the restaurant where my roommates and friends were waiting to celebrate. Before we went inside, Mom pulled me into a tight hug. Today is about celebrating you, Madison, she whispered fiercely. All you've accomplished despite everything. Don't let this revelation steal your joy. She was right, as usual. I took a deep breath and pushed thoughts of Diane and Dad aside. They had already taken enough of my life. They wouldn't take this day too. The celebration was exactly what I needed: laughter, good food, friends who had become family. Mom and Lucas fit seamlessly into this world I'd created for myself at Columbia, away from the toxic environment of my childhood. Professor Jenkins, my psychology mentor, raised a toast to my acceptance into the graduate program at NYU, news I hadn't even shared with Mom and Lucas yet. To Madison, he said, glass raised high, whose insights into family systems and resilience will make her an exceptional therapist. Your personal experience combined with your academic excellence gives you a unique perspective that will help many families heal. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew my history. I had chosen to study psychology partly to understand what had happened in my own family, why Diane behaved as she did, why Dad enabled her, why patterns of toxicity perpetuate across generations. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, I checked my phone to find 3 missed calls from Dad and a text message. I know today is your day with your mom and Lucas. I won't intrude. But when you're ready, I'd like to talk. I've moved out of the house. Staying at the courtyard on 3rd. Diane and I are separating. Not because of the cancer, because of the truth. I should have seen it years ago. I'm so sorry, Madison. So very sorry. I showed the message to Lucas, who read it with a frown. Convenient timing, he muttered. What do you mean? She's dying. And suddenly he sees the light? Where was this revelation when we were kids? When we needed him? His bitterness was justified. But something about Dad's message seemed genuine in a way his communications hadn't been in years. Without Diane controlling the narrative, perhaps his true feelings were finally emerging. Are you going to meet with him? Mom asked, reading over my shoulder. I was surprised by the question. Would you be upset if I did? She shook her head. Mija, he's your father. Despite everything, I know you love him. And he loves you, even if he failed to show it properly. Her generosity, after all she'd suffered, humbled me. I'll think about it, I said. 2 days later. After the graduation excitement had settled, I texted Dad and agreed to meet him for coffee. The Courtyard Hotel was only a few blocks from my apartment, a distance that highlighted how close he could have been all these years if Diane hadn't orchestrated their move to Connecticut. He was waiting when I arrived, looking simultaneously better and worse than at graduation. More alert, more present, but the dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. Madison. He stood as I approached, awkward in a way I'd never seen him. Thank you for coming. We ordered coffee and sat in uncomfortable silence until he finally spoke. I've been trying to understand how I could have been so blind, he began. How I could have failed you and Lucas so completely. That's what I'd like to understand too, I said quietly. Dad stared into his coffee. After your mother and I divorced, I was lost. Diane seemed so certain about everything when I felt uncertain about everything. That certainty was attractive. Comforting. He looked up at me, eyes red-rimmed. It's no excuse. Just the beginning of how I failed you both. Each time you or Lucas tried to tell me something was wrong. Accepting it would have meant acknowledging that I'd made another mistake, another failure. So I took the coward's way out. You believed what was easiest to believe, I supplied. Yes. He nodded miserably. And Diane knew exactly how to play on my insecurities, especially about your mother. Elena was always stronger than me, more self-assured. Diane suggested that Elena was using you and Lucas to manipulate me, to punish me for the divorce. I sipped my coffee, letting him talk. When you found the emerald. And I denied it was the same one. I think part of me knew you were right. But admitting it would have meant confronting something terrible about the woman I was building a life with. About the choices I'd made. So you sacrificed your relationship with us instead, I concluded. Dad flinched but nodded. Yes, God help me, that's exactly what I did. He ran a hand through his graying hair. When Diane told me her diagnosis, something shifted. I realized how precious little time we have, how years have been wasted on lies. And then she confessed everything? Not immediately, Dad admitted. First came the therapy. Then small admissions that grew larger. The full confession came after her 2nd round of chemotherapy. She said she couldn't face death with these lies between us. I considered his words carefully. Are you leaving her because she's sick? No. Dad looked genuinely shocked. I'm leaving because our entire relationship was built on manipulation and lies. I'm leaving because staying would mean continuing to betray you and Lucas. He hesitated. And Cassidy. At the mention of my half-sister, I softened slightly. How is she taking all this? Dad's expression grew pained. She's confused. Angry. She's 11 and her entire world is imploding. The mother she idolized is seriously ill and suddenly confessing to years of lies. The father she trusted is moving out. And the half-siblings she was taught to resent are suddenly being presented as people she should want to know. The complexity of Cassidy's situation struck me. In many ways, she was the most innocent victim in all this. I've signed Diane and me up for specialized family therapy with Cassidy, Dad continued. And I'd like to ask, if someday, when you're ready, if you might consider being part of Cassidy's life again. Not for Diane's sake. Not even for mine. But for Cassidy. The request was fair, though complicated. I thought about my half-sister, who would likely lose her mother in the coming months or years, whose entire understanding of her family was being rewritten. I can't make promises, I said finally. But I'm not closing any doors. Dad nodded, relief visible on his face. That's more than I deserve. We talked for another hour, covering painful ground that should have been addressed years ago. Dad apologized for specific incidents, the scissors night, the financial aid forms, countless moments when he chose Diane's version of reality over ours. Each acknowledgement felt like a small weight lifting from my shoulders. I've spoken to my financial advisor, Dad said as our meeting drew to a close. I'm setting up trusts for you and Lucas, money that should have been available to you for college. It can't make up for the years of support you missed, but it might help with graduate school or whatever you choose next. I don't need your money, Dad, I said, more sharply than intended. He nodded. I know you don't. You and Lucas both found ways to succeed without my support, which makes me simultaneously proud and ashamed. But this isn't about what you need. It's about what I owe. As we parted, Dad hesitated, clearly wanting to hug me, but unsure if it would be welcome. I made the decision for him, stepping forward for a brief, awkward embrace. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was a step in a direction that had seemed impossible just days before. Walking back to my apartment, I called Lucas to fill him in. His reaction was predictably more skeptical than mine. So Diane gets a redemption arc because she's dying, and Dad gets forgiven because he finally grew a spine? Lucas scoffed. Convenient timing for both of them. I'm not saying they're forgiven. I clarified. I'm saying I'm listening. There's a difference. Lucas sighed. I know. I can't forget how they made us feel, Mads. How they made Mom feel. Neither can I assured him. But I'm starting to think holding onto that anger forever only gives them continued power over us. There was a long pause before Lucas spoke again. When did you get so wise, little sister? Probably around the time I got this fancy psychology degree, I joked, and was rewarded with his reluctant laughter. The next few weeks were a blur of activity, moving out of my college apartment, preparing for graduate school, and navigating the new, fragile connections with Dad. I met with him twice more, each conversation a careful excavation of the past, painful but necessary. 3 weeks after graduation, Mom received an unexpected call from Diane's sister, Barbara. She wants to meet with you, Mom told me, surprise evident in her voice. Diane's condition has worsened. The doctors are saying months, not years. Despite everything, the news hit me harder than expected. Diane had been a dark presence in my life for so long that the idea of her absence created a strange dissonance. Are you going to see her? I asked. Mom nodded slowly. I think I must. There are things we need to say to each other, woman to woman. 2 days later, Mom visited Diane at her sister's home, where she was staying while receiving treatment. She returned looking emotionally drained, but somehow peaceful. How was it? I asked hesitantly. Mom sat beside me on the couch. Difficult. Necessary. She took my hand. Diane asked me to tell you that Cassidy has been asking about you. The child is struggling, Madison. She's losing her mother and trying to understand years of lies. I felt a tug of responsibility toward my half-sister. What did you tell her? That you have a good heart, beneath all the hurt. That you would make your own decision. The weight of that decision pressed on me. Could I set aside years of pain to be there for Cassidy? Should I? A week later, I found myself sitting in a specialist family therapist's office with Dad, Diane, and Cassidy. The therapist, Dr. Reynolds, had suggested this controlled setting for our first meeting. Cassidy looked so much like a younger version of Diane that it was startling, but her wary expression reminded me of Dad. She'd grown several inches since I'd last seen her. The little girl features beginning to mature toward adolescence. I don't understand why they need to be here, Cassidy said immediately, glaring at me. Despite her hostility, I noticed how she gripped Diane's hand, fear evident beneath her anger. Because they're family, Dr. Reynolds said gently. And family connections are important, especially during difficult times. They hate Mom, Cassidy insisted. They've always hated her. Diane looked pained. Cassidy, we've talked about this. The things I told you about Madison and Lucas, they weren't true. She said you were jealous of me, I said quietly. That I thought I was too smart to spend time with you. That wasn't true, Cassidy. I've always wanted to know you better. Cassidy's lower lip trembled. Then why did you stop coming to see us? The question broke my heart with its innocent simplicity. From her perspective, Lucas and I had simply abandoned her. Before I could answer, Diane spoke. Because I made it very difficult for them to visit, sweetheart. I scheduled things when they were supposed to come. I didn't give them messages. I wanted to keep you all to myself. Cassidy looked bewildered. Why would you do that? Because I was sick, Diane said softly. Not the kind of sick I am now. A different kind of sick. In my mind and heart. I was afraid and jealous, and I did very hurtful things. The raw honesty in the room was uncomfortable but necessary. Dr. Reynolds guided us through a carefully structured conversation, helping Cassidy understand the complex dynamics without burdening her with inappropriate details. When the session ended, Cassidy looked at me uncertainly. Mom says you're really good at math. That you help college students with hard problems. I nodded. I was a peer tutor, yes. I'm having trouble with fractions, she admitted. Dad tries to help, but he makes it more confusing. Dad had the grace to look sheepish. Numbers were never my strong suit. Maybe I could help you sometime, I offered. Careful not to push too hard. Cassidy considered this, glancing at Diane, who nodded encouragement. Maybe, Cassidy agreed cautiously. It was a small opening, but a meaningful one. Over the next 2 months, a new routine emerged. I visited Cassidy weekly, initially helping with math homework, but gradually expanding to other activities. Lucas joined occasionally, though his anger toward Diane remained closer to the surface than mine. Diane's health declined rapidly. The aggressive cancer had spread despite treatment, and by August, she was moved to hospice care. One evening, Barbara called to say Diane was asking for me. I found her propped up in the hospice bed, alarmingly thin, her once perfect appearance now ravaged by disease. Despite everything she'd done, seeing her reduced to this frail state stirred unexpected compassion. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I sat in the chair beside her bed. Cassidy wasn't here? She visited earlier. I didn't want her to see me at my worst. Diane's hand trembled as she adjusted her oxygen tube. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For giving Cassidy what I couldn't. Honesty. Stability. A sister who shows her healthy love doesn't demand perfection." I was startled by the insight. "She's a good kid. Smart. Resilient. Like you," Diane said. "I see it now how similar you are in some ways. Your determination. Your intelligence." She paused, breathing labored. "I was so threatened by you. So afraid Robert would see Elena in you and remember what he'd lost." "Dad never stopped loving us," I said, realizing the truth of it even as I spoke. "He just couldn't find a way to reconcile that love with his loyalty to you." Diane nodded weakly. "I made sure of that. Made him choose again and again." Her eyes filled with tears. "I want you to know that I am genuinely sorry, Madison. Not just because I'm dying. Because I finally understand the damage I've done. To all of us," I said quietly. "Including yourself." She managed a faint smile. "Your psychology degree is showing." After a moment, she continued, "I have one last request, though I have no right to ask anything of you." "What is it?" "Be there for Cassidy after I'm gone. Not as a replacement mother, she is Barbara for that, but as a sister. Someone who understands what it's like to have complicated family relationships." The request was weighted with meaning. After years of trying to keep us apart, Diane was asking me to remain in Cassidy's life. "I will," I promised. "Not for you. For her." Diane closed her eyes briefly. "That's fair." As I stood to leave, she caught my hand with surprising strength. "One more thing. Your father, he does love you, Madison. More than he ever loved me. It was why I felt so threatened." Her grip loosened. "Don't punish him forever for the weakness I exploited." 3 days later, Diane passed away. The funeral was small, family only. Cassidy clung to Dad throughout the service, occasionally reaching for my hand or Lucas's. The complexity of grief was evident on everyone's faces, sorrow mixed with relief, anger tempered by understanding. In the months that followed, our fragmented family began a cautious reconstruction. Dad moved back to Brooklyn to be closer to all of us. Lucas gradually allowed him back into his life, though their relationship remained more distant than mine with Dad. Mom maintained a cordial co-parenting relationship with him, her natural grace extending to forgiveness that continually amazed me. Cassidy split time between Dad's new apartment and her Aunt Barbara's home. She struggled with the loss of her mother and the revelations about Diane's behavior, requiring therapy and patience. But slowly, she began to form genuine bonds with Lucas and me, untainted by Diane's jealousy. A year after Diane's death, we gathered for Thanksgiving at Mom's apartment, an unlikely assembly of people connected by complicated history. Dad and his brother Charles brought the turkey. Lucas and his new girlfriend made desserts. Cassidy proudly contributed homemade cranberry sauce. Even Barbara joined us, having formed an unexpected friendship with Mom. As we sat around the expanded table, I watched Cassidy laugh at one of Lucas's jokes, saw Dad's genuine smile as he talked with Mom about her latest art acquisition project. Noticed how the family had reshaped itself into something new, imperfect, but healing. Later that evening, as we cleared dishes, Cassidy approached me with a small gift box. "I found this in Mom's things," she explained. "I think she would want you to have it." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a small emerald charm, a miniature echo of my grandmother's necklace. She had it made from a tiny piece that broke off the big emerald when she had it cleaned before returning it to you, Cassidy explained. The jeweler said it couldn't be reattached, so she kept it and had this made instead. I slipped the bracelet on, emotions complicated. "It's beautiful. Thank you." Cassidy hesitated before adding, "I'm sorry for all the mean things I said before. Mom told me to say those things." "I know," I assured her. "And it wasn't your fault. Do you think?" She began uncertainly. "Do you think Mom really changed at the end? Or was she just saying what we wanted to hear?" It was the question I'd asked myself many times over the past year. "I think people are complicated," I said finally. "I think your mom did a lot of harmful things, but in the end, she tried to make amends the best way she knew how." Cassidy nodded, processing this. "Dad says I should go to therapy for a long time. He says it's so I don't end up with mom's issues. Therapy is just a tool to help us understand ourselves better, I explained. I go to therapy too. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. Really? Even though you're going to be a therapist yourself. I smiled. Especially because I'm going to be a therapist. We need to understand our own wounds before we can help others heal theirs. Cassidy seemed comforted by this. Will you help me understand? About Mom and everything that happened? As much as I can, I promised. Some things you'll understand better as you get older. But I'll always be honest with you. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat on the fire escape outside my apartment, the same spot where Lucas and I had shared ice cream and secrets years ago. The city lights twinkled below. 1,000 stories unfolding in windows across Brooklyn. I thought about the long, painful journey our family had taken, the manipulation, the lies, the hurt, but also the healing, the forgiveness, the rebuilding. I thought about Diane, whose broken childhood had created a woman determined to control everything and everyone around her, whose fear of abandonment had driven her to destructive behavior that ultimately isolated her from authentic love. I thought about Dad, who had failed us in critical ways but was working daily to rebuild what had been broken, his remorse evident in consistent actions rather than empty words. I thought about Mom, whose dignity and capacity for forgiveness had shown me what true strength looks like. And I thought about Cassidy, innocently caught in the crossfire of adult dysfunction, now navigating the complicated legacy of a mother who both loved and damaged her. The silver bracelet caught the moonlight as I turned my wrist. From broken things, something new had been created, smaller than the original, but with its own kind of beauty. It seemed an apt metaphor for our family. As a soon-to-be therapist, I understood the clinical terms for what had happened in our family: narcissistic abuse, gaslighting, triangulation, enablement. But as a daughter, a sister, and a human being, I also understood something deeper, that pain often passes through generations until someone is brave enough to feel it instead of transmitting it. Diane had lacked that courage until the very end of her life. Dad had found it late, but sincerely. And I was determined to break whatever toxic patterns might still lie dormant in my own psyche, to ensure that any future family I created would be built on honesty rather than manipulation, love rather than fear. The next morning, I met with my advisor to discuss my doctoral research focus: healing family systems, breaking generational patterns of emotional manipulation. As I outlined my research interests, Dr. Harrison nodded approvingly. Your personal experience gives you insight many researchers lack, she noted. Just be careful to maintain proper boundaries between your research and your own healing process. I will. I promised. But I think my experience is precisely what will help me connect with families going through similar situations. I understand both the victim's perspective and the complex humanity of the perpetrator. Dr. Harrison smiled. That kind of empathy, combined with professional boundaries and evidence-based practices, will make you an exceptional therapist, Madison. As I walked across campus afterward, I called Lucas. How's the apartment hunting going? Found a place in Park Slope, he replied. 2 bedrooms. Good area for Cassidy to visit on weekends. The fact that he was considering Cassidy in his housing plans warmed my heart. Dad mentioned she's doing better in school. Yeah, the therapy's helping. And not having to live with constant lies probably helps too. His tone had softened when discussing Diane over recent months. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of understanding that allowed him to move forward. We're still on for dinner Friday? Dad wanted to try that new Thai place. I'll be there, Lucas confirmed. Bringing Sarah. If that's cool. She wants to meet the family. The casual way he said the family, including Dad, including Cassidy, spoke volumes about how far we'd come. That evening, I sat down to write in my journal, a practice my therapist had recommended years ago. I found myself addressing Diane directly. It's been a year since you died. I never thought I'd say this, but in some ways, your death brought healing that might never have happened otherwise. The truth finally came to light. Dad finally stood up for himself and for us. Cassidy is learning that love shouldn't come with manipulation attached. I don't know if I've forgiven you completely. Maybe complete forgiveness isn't necessary for healing. What I do know is that I no longer let my anger toward you define me. I've learned that understanding someone's actions doesn't excuse them, but it does help break their power over you. You asked me to be there for Cassidy, and I am. She's smart and sensitive and stronger than she knows. Sometimes I see glimpses of you in her, not the manipulation or jealousy, but the determination. The quick wit, the perfectionism. I'm helping her channel those traits positively, helping her see that she doesn't need to control others to be worthy of love. Dad says that in your final weeks. You spoke about wanting to break the cycle. Perhaps that's your real legacy, not the pain you caused, but your final recognition that it needed to stop. In that way, your dying gift was the truth that allows us all to heal. I wear the emerald bracelet sometimes. It reminds me that broken things can be transformed into something new. Not the same as before, but beautiful in its own way. As I closed my journal, I realized something profound. The story of my family wasn't just about betrayal and pain. It was also about resilience. About the human capacity for change, about the possibility that even the most damaged relationships might find some measure of healing. Not every broken family finds its way back to wholeness. Not every toxic pattern gets recognized and addressed. But ours did, however imperfectly. And in that imperfect healing, I found hope, not just for my own family, but for the families I would someday help as a therapist. The lessons were hard-won but valuable. That truth, however painful, is ultimately less destructive than comfortable lies. That understanding the roots of harmful behavior doesn't require accepting its continuation. That forgiveness is not a single act but a process, sometimes lifelong. That family bonds, though they can be weapons of extraordinary pain, can also be instruments of profound healing. And perhaps most importantly, that we are not doomed to repeat the patterns we inherit. With awareness, courage, and support, we can write new stories for ourselves and for generations to come.